Freedom, A Universal Yearning by John Coldebella, read by Leanne Arno.
The concept of freedom is ancient and familiar to most people. Our language abounds in expressions, phrases and metaphors in relation to it. As a word on its own, it doesn't mean much. It needs a context. Freedom of movement, speech, association, opportunity, etc. Freedom from oppression, hunger, disease. Our dictionaries approach its definition by looking at what it is not: an absence or lack of restraint, constraint, suppression, restriction, control, force, containment, obstruction, bondage, dependence, and many other similar words. With the above in mind, a glance at the world around us reveals that not all people have equal access to freedom. Perhaps this has always been the case. World history is filled with stories of the struggle to attain it. Freedom is also a word in which paradox and seeming contradiction invariably arises. Physical, mental and emotional circumstances do not always correlate. People who are free to come and go can be mentally and emotionally paralysed or imprisoned. People who are physically contained or imprisoned can be free in spirit. Without restrictions on individual freedoms, there can be no social cohesion. In the current climate, where supermarket shelves are being stripped, limits on the number of items that can be purchased serve the greater good. Without self-imposed restrictions and disciplines, lives can be destroyed. A potentially dangerous tool, parents deal out freedom to their children by degrees over time, like string on a kite. Freedom and its allocation is then also a matter of responsibility to ourselves, others and the environment. All three of these are bound together. It would seem there are restraints that promote and enhance freedom as well as those that suppress and destroy it. Having misconceived ideas of self-worth leading to low self-esteem is an example of self-imposed stifling of freedom. In the quest for independence, many people find themselves addicted to substances and other activities detrimental to their well-being, prisoners of their impulsive behaviour. The grass is greener in the other paddock, but through misadventure, people can find themselves like a fish with its head stuck in a glass of water. It may be the case that what we really seek in our notion of freedom is a sense of security or peace of mind. Being in a circumstance and state of mind that allows us to exist and develop to our full potential in relationship to others and the world in which we arise. Perhaps a bird singing or whistling in a cage can be seen as a contentment or happiness based on adaptation to circumstances. Or, as in a variation of Stockholm Syndrome, a chook may stick close to its captor, trading eggs for scraps and protection from the fox. A realisation that some things are out of our control, or an acceptance of one's lot. In more defiant tones, it may be a case of, you can imprison my body, even torture and murder it, but I will not relinquish my spirit. In a scene from the movie The Shawshank Redemption, a prisoner convicted of a crime he didn't commit explains to fellow inmates his ability to remain sane through prolonged periods of solitary confinement in a cell without light as being the result of having the company of classical music composers. Over the course of a lifetime, he has internalised pieces of music and can play them in his mind at will. In another scene, the same prisoner locks himself in the warden's office. After putting a record of a female vocalist on the record player, turning up the volume to full and flicking a switch to broadcast throughout the prison, he sits down, puts his feet up on the desk, closes his eyes and smiles. The prisoners in the yard look up in wonder to the source of the sound. The narrator of the movie says something along the lines of, I don't know what that lady was singing about, but for a very brief period, every man in Shawshank prison was free. Not every human or animal has such capacity or resilience. People subjected to prolonged and extreme adversity, such as in the case of domestic violence and other forms of abuse, can become permanently and destructively scarred, which can in turn have detrimental effects on subsequent generations. Ironically, this can also apply to people damaged by wartime experiences, fighting for flag and freedom. Through no fault of their own, they go on to raise dysfunctional families, sometimes murdering them. Some birds and animals will not thrive or breed in captivity. They pine for the freedom denied to them and die like an infant deprived of physical touch and affection. In another twist, the flag planted on Botany Bay in 1788, the flag of a democratic nation, signalled the end of sovereignty for Australia's Indigenous people. The bars of the first cage that ensued were made of gun barrels. The Indigenous population was subsequently deprived of land, family, culture and language. Photos of people manacled together come to mind. People were shot for taking sheep from where native fauna had traditionally been hunted. People received physical punishment for speaking their own language. Today there are many who believe we live free lives because our system of governance is called democracy, despite threats of police raids and imprisonment for speaking the truth, as in the case of medical staff on Manus Island, or of journalists informing us of what our government is doing in our name. The justification for this is presented in terms of national security, for the greater good of all except those in detention. Historically, political freedom has arisen after hard-fought battles of resistance to oppression. More often than not, bloodshed has been involved. It's been said that the price of such freedom is eternal vigilance. Political freedom is said to be lost by increment, gradual and subtle, when it is not guarded and defended. Sometimes freedom is lost suddenly and violently with invasion, as can be attested to by those Indigenous peoples in various parts of the world. The bounty and prosperity depicted in the table scene in painting number 1 could be said to represent the outcome of hard work and sacrifice. Alternatively, like freedom, it may be inherited. In the former case, the resulting benefit and well-being is truly appreciated and savoured with satisfaction, accompanied by a sense of achievement. In the latter, there is more scope for the possibility of complacency, lack of appreciation and wastefulness. Those trade unionists who fought and sacrificed for better pay and working conditions had a better understanding and appreciation of both the benefits that they had won, as well as of the implications as those gains began to be wound back. Unlike those who inherited those fruits, some of whom took them for granted and behaved in irresponsible ways that gave ammunition to those who would strip them of those gains, effectively relinquishing them without much of a struggle. The table scene appears to have become dishevelled. The statuette could serve as a reminder of the many people worldwide who don't have enough to eat, but it's really just an ornament. The cockatoos could well start to defecate on the tablecloth as well as start chewing on it along with the chairs, much the same way that cockatoos like to chew on television antennas and weatherboards on houses. The chief scavenger and opportunist, the raven, waits in the wings for its opportunity, well camouflaged. Ravens wait for an unprotected lamb to pick the eyes out. When I picked peas during the summer school holidays in the late 1960s and early 70s, the crows would gather on the wires of the paddock fence towards the end of the working day and descend into the crop as the cars containing the pea pickers drove away. If I neglected to net my fruit trees or don't take steps to guard the fruit, the lorikeets will make quick work of it. Most of it is not even eaten but lays shredded under the tree. Then the work of establishing the orchard and the annual pruning and maintenance is in vain. Even having taken the protective measures, the birds find any gaps in the netting, and so constant attention and monitoring is required to ensure that I will reap what has been sown. There's a saying that goes, "You can't stop a bird from landing on your head, but you can keep it from building a nest in your hair." It is said to mean that we can't stop a negative thought from entering our mind, but we have control over whether that takes root. If that thought is without valid foundation and is in relation to another person or group of people based on gender, race, sexuality, religion or lack of religion, political leanings or differences in appearance or perceived ability, then there arises a potential for unhealthy intolerance. A look of defiance or contempt directed at someone as a result of such thoughts can diminish their dignity. Their right or freedom to simply be is further compromised, even threatened when those negative thoughts and looks become words and actions. A worst case scenario is war. Then everyone's freedom is impacted. The world becomes a darker place. Ironically, when challenged, those who engage in spreading this kind of bird nesting, including those making a living from it, will assume the position of victim and say they are being deprived of their right to free speech as the sole justification and defence of their actions. They are like the raven in painting number 8, which gives the impression of being caged. Closer inspection reveals that neither the raven or the perch on which it sits is inside the cage. Painting number 3 shows the possibilities of complete freedom or total oppression. The bird is situated outside the cage with the option to spread its wings while having an open door to retreat to a place where it can safely rest. If it goes too far, it may be in danger. If it retreats too far into its protective cage, it will be so constrained that it will be hardly able to move. In order to be independent, we have to fly the coop. The world can seem a scary place as we fly into the unknown. We have to trust our instincts, not be afraid to express ourselves, be true to ourselves. More than once in my life, I've bitten my tongue on an idea that has come to me, only to hear someone with more courage than me express the same idea later on. Aspects of our personal development or evolution and the sense of liberation, which is the reward of that, are our own personal responsibility. If we fail to fly into the unfamiliar or to speak out on behalf of another when our heart tells us to, then our own sense of free spirit also suffers. In a seeming contradiction for freedom to work, there must be constraints imposed on it. Personal freedom must be seen in relation to the freedom and rights of others. Constraints are a bit like cholesterols. There are beneficial ones and detrimental ones. Some constraints have to be imposed from outside for the greater good of all, and we as individuals have to identify the ones we have to impose on ourselves in our own unique circumstances and natures for our own personal good. We also have to learn to recognise which of the constraints, whether arising from within or imposed from outside, are destructive and detrimental to our individual and collective freedom, and resist and reject them.